Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to As I Live and Grieve. I know you probably get tired of me saying this week after week after week, but boy, do I have a great guest for today. My life on this podcast is pretty much an open book when it comes to the grief I've experienced, am experiencing, and living with, and some of my likes, dislikes, and everything. I've told you before I'm a writer, but what you probably don't know is my secret love is poetry. I'm not a poet, though. Not a poet. And up until recently, my favorite all-time poet has been Robert Frost, especially The Road Not Taken. I love the symbolism in that poem, and I could go on and on about that. But now, guess what? I have a new favorite poet, and he's with us today, John Roedel. Thank you so much for coming with us today and being our guest.
Oh my goodness, I am so grateful and excited, nervous that you asked me to join you on your podcast today. It's amazing. Thank you.
Wow, the fact that I could make someone that does words as well as you nervous, that's really, you have no idea what you've just done to my ego. And most days my ego does not need any help. So before we get rolling on this, could you just give our listeners a little bit of your background, please?
I kind of describe myself as an unexpected poet because it wasn't anything I had, any English teacher who ever had the misfortune of sitting down to educate me at any point in my life would have agreed that I had no interest in poetry growing up. In college, I didn't study it. I didn't really read poetry until it started emerging from me about 4 years ago. It wasn't anything I had any at all understanding of. I listened to some button poets on like YouTube or things like that when they would show up on my Facebook feed, but poetry wasn't really anything I was super interested in until all of a sudden it just started coming out of me, just emerging. It's almost like a broken faucet. It just started pouring out. And once it started to, I just kind of said yes to it. And I have thrown my life into it. I've gone back, and Robert Frost is amazing. I wish I would have known 20 years ago how amazing his writing was. Maya Angelou, I'm going into Rumi and Hafiz and all the old classics of poets. I'm trying to, I put the cart before the horse, I suppose. And so I'm going back and kind of immersing myself in poets and even poets of the day like Derek Brown and Sarah Kay and Phil Kay. I just love all forms of poetry and the voices from it. But I wish I could tell people, oh no, I've been studying it my whole life. I understand it, and now I'm writing it. I started writing it before I even really knew what it was. So that was kind of the poetry background for me. Before that, my background is I kind of coach and teach improv and perform comedy improv. I do things like that. I like to make people laugh on stage. So it's as much of a surprise to me as anyone that I'm writing poetry and writing about really serious, oftentimes heart-pulling topics. It's a surprise to me because it was never my intention to try to make people feel anything other than maybe laughing or joy. And it's just this whole side of my own personality and life that I'm just discovering in real time with everybody else.
Well, it's amazing. And, for a lot of people, when you say poetry, I can almost start to sense them taking steps backward. And what they used to, when they think of poetry, is the one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, the rhyming, syncopated poetry. But for me, ever since, and it was probably in high school, when I first discovered what then was labeled contemporary poetry, that it didn't rhyme, that it didn't necessarily even have a rhythm to it, but it was just an expression in as few words sometimes as possible to emote. And,
Yeah.
it became very special to me in general. Now, John, I first ran across your name, believe it or not, when someone, and I don't even know who it was, one of my friends said, "Hey, Kathy, what do you think of this poem?" And it's called Fitting In, and it's from your book, Hey God, Hey John. 4 lines. Me. Hey God. God. Hey John. Me. I don't fit in. God. You're welcome. Those 4 lines said so much to me at that point in my life when I just didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. And since
Yeah.
I saw those 4 lines, I thought, oh, I gotta check this guy out. And that's how it began. So,
Oh my goodness. That's yeah, I should probably explain. So I started writing these conversations with quote God unquote about 2015, 2016 on Facebook, and this is before I even
right,
started writing poetry. I was going through a not great time in my life, mental health, emotional health, spiritual doubt, every kind of doubt. It is a perfect midlife crisis. It's very cliched. And instead of buying a car or timeshare in Cabo or doing things like that, I I took these frustrations and resentments and all this tangled ball of knots in my heart, and using my comedy background, I thought, well, I'm going to kind of poke fun at it all, and I'm going to start having fake conversations with God on Facebook, just in real time, just kind of trying to lightheartedly poke fun at the self help movement and all of the movements that were telling me if you just prayed more, you'll feel better. And if you just did these things, you'll feel better. And none of that was working. I read every self help book I could find. I was diving into all my old Sunday school notebooks. I was a cradle Catholic, and going back to all my Sunday school and trying to draw upon all these things that I thought would be there for me when the poop hit the fan for me in life, and it wasn't happening. So I had all this resentment kind of towards spirituality and towards just the the kind of the cookie cutter life coaching self help out there. So I thought I'm going to make kind of poke fun at the whole thing by having these fake conversations with God. And at first they were just kind of benign and silly and stupid, talking about why I should, maybe lay off eating fried foods, or what was on Survivor the night before. And eventually, I didn't even really notice I was doing it until I started getting feedback from people. I was starting to put in little breadcrumbs of my actual real life into it, not things of just the generals like, oh, the first time I ever admitted I had depression was when I typed it out in one of those conversations with God. And it was tricky for me because at the time I was writing these things, I was getting feedback from friends and family who thought it was cute or whatever. And I remember typing that out and being stuck for a moment, saying, what are people going to I didn't even ever consider this for me. And once I typed it out, it made complete sense to me. It felt like, oh, that was the dove in the unicorn, the unicorn dove in my front yard sign from God I was waiting from. It was just me typing out, I have depression. And it became real for me in that instance. And I thought, well, if I put this out there on Facebook for everyone to read, and I live in a small town, and people think of me as a funny person, what is that going to do to how people are going to think about me? And I struggled with that for about 30 minutes. Normally, my process is I would type it out and just put it out there for everyone to read, and I would just shut my laptop and not care where it happened to it. And in this, I really struggled with what's going to happen. And eventually, I just found the courage and I published it. And then within 5 or 10 minutes, it wasn't friends and family responding to me, it was strangers saying, yep, that's my story too. Yeah, I understand that too. And it gave me that moment. Selfishly, it connected me to people so I didn't feel as alone. And I thought, oh, wow, here's someone else going through this at the same time that I am. And then I started feeling like a little bit of responsibility. The more I shared myself, my authentic, true, vulnerable self with people, the more it seemed that it connected me with folks, but it also seemed to help them at the same time helping me to know that I wasn't alone. And those funny little conversations at first started transforming into my first attempts at poetry, where eventually the God character in this, because I wasn't evangelizing or trying to convince anybody of anything, eventually this God character started responding back to me lyrically and in poetry form. And that's when I eventually kind of surrendered the whole format of Hey God, Hey John, and I just started just writing the straight transcript of those kind of lyrical poetic responses.
Yeah, well, what a blessing that book was. And after I read those 4 lines given to me by a friend, I did buy a copy of the book, Hey God, Hey John. And I read cover to cover, probably without even getting up to get a drink of water. I was
Gosh.
hooked. I told you, I fell in love with your words. And then I had to know more. I had to know more. I had to know more. And then lo and behold, I ran across a poem that started my brain and heart divorced a decade ago over who was to blame, about how big of a mess I have become eventually.
Yeah.
And I went through that poem. And then I discovered a newer book more recently, Upon Departure. And that, John, is what brought you to our podcast. Because Upon Departure catches so much of that emotion of grief. And if I, in my grief, and so I offer this to listeners, if you are stuck in that moment where you simply cannot cry, you can no longer get that emotion out of you, which you know that you need to, because that helps the healing process. Purchase one of John's books, especially Upon Departure, and read. Because I have to tell you, people, when you read some simpler words that he has written, the tears will come. I have to read, in all honesty, now I can't read cover to cover, John. I can only read a poem at a time. Because even though I am 4 years beyond my most recent loss, your words reduce me to tears. But I need those tears. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. They are, I can bandy about words like eloquence. I could get the thesaurus and, use all kinds of words like that. But your words touch me to my heart and my soul. And I know they will do the same for others. So, where do you find these words?
That's a great question. And if I were a smarter person, I would be able to give you an answer. Or if I felt like I was a more enlightened person, I would give you an answer like, oh, I speak to the sky and I download all these wonderful insights from some sort of divine source. But I don't think that's true. I think for me, I look at writing as more of an excavation than it is a muse on the outside that I'm communicating with and having something whisper in my ear or inspire me that way. I look at writing as digging into parts of my heart that have not been excavated yet. It's like an archaeological dig. Things in my past that I haven't confronted, old wounds, heartaches, and that's what grief was. I had never really thought about grief or talked about the people I had lost in my life ever until I started writing about it. And it was like going to an old ruin that I hadn't been to. It had like going to a house, a haunted house, where I'd maybe only spent time in the lobby, and I was starting to knock down doors that I hadn't been into in my heart in a long time. And I would open up these doors and go into a new wing of the house, and there I would revisit old scars or things that I hadn't come to closure with. And in these little extra rooms that I hadn't visited, I would find words that were already there written in the walls. That's kind of how I look at it. These aren't things that, these are things that I think I've always known. These are words that have always been there. that I just never gave light to. I had never thought about. I had never explored them before, and they had just been hidden from me. And so I look at writing as, okay, where am I going into this labyrinth house next? And I knock down a door and I walk inside and I spend time with that emotion or that feeling or that memory. And then it's almost like invisible ink. These words just kind of show up in front of me and I kind of transcribe it. And that's the best way I can explain it. That's where the words come from. I think they've always been there, and I think I'm just starting to read them for myself. That's what I do. I write these poems. Everything in Upon Departure, I wrote the same way I did Hey God, Hey John. I just write it in real time with my fat little penguin fingers, and I publish it on Facebook. Within I don't think about it. I don't edit it. I don't overthink it. I don't worry about what anyone's going to think. I just find these words, I mash them out, and I put them out there immediately, or else I'll chicken out. And all those poems and Upon Departure were done in that process. I put them on Facebook first, and then eventually I realized, oh my gosh, I had quite a few poems on grief, and I hadn't really counted. I didn't really know. And I looked back and I found 40 poems that I had written on grief. And so that's why I put it together Upon Departure.
Yeah, listening to you like that, I don't even think you realize how deeply your words can reach. And just like if I go to Google, who's one of my best friends, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, they're my top three.
Right.
But if I go to Google now, and because maybe on Facebook I want to post a quote to go along with our podcast, just as an additional post or something, I'll go to Google and I'll type Greek quotes, and I'll find a quote from Maya Angelou, I'll find one from Rumi and everything like that. I am predicting right now, John Roedel, and you heard it here first, that at some point in the not too distant future, you're going to find this one. Quote, your grief is the purest love letter that you can ever send to the one you have lost to death. Unquote, John Roedel. You're going to find that one, and you're also going to find, quote, everybody that you have lost along the way returns to you on your last day. Unquote, John Roedel. They're going to be there, John, because in just a few words, you have captured something. I have tears in my eyes already. You can probably see me. The listeners can't, fortunately. But in your word, in your few words, you put so much emotion. I don't think you realize it.
I don't try to think about anything. I don't try to think. When I write about grief, I consider grief to be the most amazing, heartbreaking, quintessential human experience we all celebrate together. When I was young, thinking about grief, I always thought it's only loss, it's only heartbreak, it's only something being ripped away from you. And the grayer my hair gets, the more I see it as grief. We can't avoid grief. If we entangle our lives with other people, if we get our roots all tangled together underneath the soil like we do, and it's a miracle how amazing it is. Do we get to have that experience? So we make these relationships with one another where we can entangle ourselves in such a deep way. Of course, when someone leaves us, we're going to feel that absence and that heartbreak. But there's a whole other side to it. There's joy. I mean, it's the right song playing at the radio at the right time. There's a moment of of memory, and it's not all sad. It's all the emotions, it's everything we experience on this human plane, all wrapped up into one burrito, all at once. And that's why I think I wrote about grief so much without really thinking about it, because it covers the bases, it covers the gamut of all human emotion. And I'm fascinated by it. And I think, and here's the other thing I wrote. I've never thought about this till right now. So great job. Writing about grief is a universal element for all of us, regardless of our political parties. And in this day and age, everything is political, regardless of our cultural upbringing, regardless of where we are, status in life. Everybody grieves everybody will lose somebody at some point in our life, and I try to write from that place of this is a shared human experience. We all, especially with COVID, we've all lost somebody over the last few years, and this is a shared moment in time in which I wish we would have spent it all together supporting one another rather than blaming each other. And that's why I put this grief book out. I kind of hustled through it because I wanted it to come out right about now in this age of COVID. Because my goodness, this last few years we've grieved so much, loss of life, loss of the way we lived our lives, everything. And I thought it was super important to have that out now.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think in your book, Upon Departure, I know your poems are numbered, and I'm thinking it might be number 10 when you talk about perceptions and things coming back and people coming back and memories. There's one poem in particular, and I know there's a phrase in it, if you come back to me as, and there are different
Mm,
ways, and usually if you come back to me as a hummingbird, if you come back to me as a flower, that has to be one of my very, very favorites of yours because it talks about so many daily encounters.
yeah,
And maybe some of those can be interpreted as messages. And if there's one thing someone who's grieving wants, it's that message. So that poem of yours in particular should really be out there for everyone who's grieving, because I think there is at least 2 or 3 lines in there that will be meaningful to any single person who's grieving. And my perspective on grief has changed, I will admit, primarily
hmm
through guests I have met while doing this podcast. And I think it was a very recent guest who mentioned that the shamans, in the shamanic perspective, they consider grief a gift because it's
right.
a process of grief that's going to pull you through the healing process. Now, we all know
Yes,
grief sucks. Pure and simple,
right.
grief sucks. It hurts. It's painful. It's devastating. But if you don't go through it, if you don't experience it, you won't get to that healing part that's on the other side. And I'm probably, I don't know, 80%, 85% there. And I feel so much more fulfilled than I ever have in my entire life.
Yeah,
But that doesn't mean that I no longer grieve, because I know I'm going to grieve for the rest of my life.
right,
Pure and simple.
right,
It's going to change. But
right.
back to your words again. Could I impose on you, maybe, to read something for us?
Oh, I would love to. I have a poem that I wrote, and I agree with you before I lose my train of thought about the idea of we must travel through the grief. We must. I look at it as I used to want to avoid it. You want to close up things, you want to close yourself off to it, and you'd want to just avoid grief. But I have a relationship. I look at it as we have a relationship now. I can't avoid it because my goodness, if I didn't grieve, that means I didn't love anybody, and I didn't allow myself. I didn't take the risk to love, and that's amazing. And this is just the part that comes with it when we give our heart to somebody. That this is part of the miracle of relationship. Um, that poem you were citing about if you come back to me, that was I wrote that one the day before I published the book, self-published it, because it just came to me at the last minute. I was another poet friend, an older gentleman here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, who I live, who I only got to know maybe his last year of being alive, and he taught me. He read a lot of poetry. I go to monthly meetings online during COVID, and he would read these poems about his wife who had passed away 25 years earlier. He had been grieving for 25 years, and his grief was different than my mom's grief. My dad had died 10 years before my mom, and my mom grieved in a very angry, guilt-ridden, regretful way. And he was grieving in a more celebratory, more, this is, isn't this amazing that we can grieve. I
Yeah.
loved my wife so deeply. The grief is my garden.
Wow.
And I was thinking he had passed away, and I thought I wanted I wanted to kind of reflect everything I had learned from him in about grief, and that's why I crammed together that poem the night before
Wow.
the book was to be published. And so I'm glad you liked it. I was always worried about publishing that poem, because I thought, well, I didn't really read it. I wrote it and I never really thought about it again. And that's what I do. I immerse myself in that emotion. And but yeah, that's one. So here is one poem I love to read, and it's a poem I wish I could have read to my mom, because her experience with grief, like I mentioned, was more of like a hardened shell. It was more, I'm circling the wagons. No one's going to talk to me about this. This is my pain. It's my poison to hold on to. And I think that's how she treated it, as a poison. My mom and dad they were married 45 years. They never slept a night apart. They had met in high school. It was a true love story. And so when he passed away, it was so hard for her. And that was my first real experience with watching somebody grieve. And I wrote this poem, um, and with her in mind, because she was always afraid that grieving made her look weak. And so she didn't ever overtly act like she was in grief. But I knew behind the scenes she was grieving alone and by herself. And so here's a poem I wish I could have read to her, that I like to think every time I read it out loud, it gets angels take it as a postcard to her wherever she's at. So this one would be number 35 in Upon Departure. When somebody else tries to tell you how you should grieve, smile and forgive them through your watering eyes. And then imagine how lonely it must be the person who audits the teardrops of other people. The well intended will tell you how long you should miss your beloved, but you take your time. Grief is a hedge maze, and being lost inside of it is more than okay. My love, don't race through your heartbreak, because you might miss a miracle or two in the teardrops rolling down your face. And don't grieve quickly just to make us all feel better. My love, if you need to, let your grief become a coral reef. Let the algae of your hurt slowly form over the years into the softest violet hue of heaven. It can take 2 lifetimes to recover when our beloved becomes an empty chair, so it's okay. I swear it's okay. Take as much time as you need. Your healing is your healing, and the scars of their absence will itch longer than you can imagine, but that's because you took the risk to love so deeply. And that's far better than the alternative. I'm proud of you and the courage it takes for you to grieve so fearlessly. Don't listen to those who want you to go back to normal. Normal will never exist for those of us who have lost a piece of our heart. If the moon broke in half, would it feel normal? To heck with normal. Normal was their scent on your collar. Normal was their voice resting in your ear. Normal was their touch on your skin. We have a new normal now. We have a new normal. It's looking at the shape of clouds for messages from the great beyond that say, your beloved is fine. We have a new normal now. It's building a cabin in the woods of our memory where you and your beloved can meet for lunch. You have a new normal now. It's crying and laughing at the same time when their favorite song plays on the radio. Grief isn't the enemy of life, numbness is. Don't become numb to your grief. Welcome it in and let it wrap you up like a blanket whenever it shows up at your door. It's okay. I swear it's okay. Your beloved misses you just as much as you miss them. And someday you two are going to get all mixed up together again. And someday the two of you are going to push each other in a swing under a shower of falling celestial blooms. And someday the two of you are going to ride comets together again out there on the edge of everything. And someday, I swear, the two of you are going to giggle about all the people who tried to tell you how to grieve.
Incredible. Number 35, you say? I haven't gotten to that page
Yep.
yet, but now I will have your voice attached to it. It's probably a good thing, John, that you don't have audiobooks, because I generally listen to audiobooks in the car while I'm driving. And you didn't have to put a disclaimer on that book that listening may invoke emotions that would not be conducive to safe driving. Thank you for that reading. Thank you for that poem.
Oh,
Thank you for all of those words. I'm in many Facebook groups for those who grieve, several for those who grieve spouses or partners. And usually when I post, I'm always posting some words about be patient with yourself. And that's
yes.
how your words started out, be patient with yourself. And that's kind of, the underlying thought of the whole thing. But then, you just went off in a whole different direction. Your poems, again, they just embody so much feeling. And for that, all I can do is say thank you. So,
Oh, I'm grateful to be able to read that poem or any of these poems. It makes them feel more real for me. I don't write these poems for publication. Like I never thought I'd be publishing poems. I only publish books after the fact because I put them on Facebook and people wanted to have them in their
yeah.
hands. I don't write to publish, and it's a weird. It's not necessarily what they teach you at Writers 101. I'm not that interested in how many books I publish. I'm just interested in trying to get all this out of this broken faucet, like I referred to at the beginning, until the faucet turns off. I'm assuming someday that it broke open, that someday I will run out. So I'm constantly trying to get as much of this out. But every time I get to read it, and it's a gift to be able to read it, it makes me feel connected to those that I've lost. And I'm really grateful you asked me to read, because it makes it come alive for me as well, and I'm always grateful.
Yeah, it's a definite gift, and all I can do is say thank you. Keep writing. Don't stop. Don't stop. Please don't stop, because I certainly will keep reading and rereading. Sadly, we are running out of time. So before I sign off for today, John, I want to give you some time to talk directly to our readers. Let them know about your website, the other books that you've written as well. We talked about Upon Departure and Hey God, but tell them about the other books that you offer them. Let them know about there's an upcoming writers retreat or two. So tell them where they can find all that out. It's your turn. The mic is yours.
Well, I am not a natural salesman or marketer, so I'll do my best. The best thing to do is to visit johnroedel.com, which is my website that has all of my book information there, as well as some events coming up. I have 5 books I've published. The Hey God, Hey John was my very first book. And then from there, well, I was struggling with the idea of this poetry, and I was resisting it. I wrote 2 poetry books that came out immediately after, called Any Given Someday. That was kind of micro poetry that I tried to keep everything to under like 20 words. And then I wrote a book called Untied. That was my first kind of, for the lack of a better term, just kind of what is it? What did I call it? Poetry vomit. It was just pouring. I thought, okay, I'm gonna have one more poetry book, and I put it all into this one book called Untied, and then I thought it would be over. But then last year I published Remedy, which has that poem you referenced earlier about my lungs and my brain want to get a divorce, and then Upon Departure, and then I'll have another book in August or November, between August and November, that will have called "Fitting In is for Sardines." That is kind of about individuality and our own honoring our own existence. So there's those 5 books I have out, and then plus one more coming in the fall. I have a couple of writers retreats. I'm doing one in Boone, North Carolina, at the Art of Living Retreat Center, July 29th through the 31st. You can find that information out on my webpage, where I'm going to be leading a weekend long of exercises in how to write from our hearts and how to close out the outside world and just write words that we know are true to us. I'm not instructing people on how to become a bestseller or how to get on Oprah's couch, because if I knew how to do that, I would be doing that. This is more just like how my process of writing and how to connect with those words that I talked about earlier, those hidden words inside of our hearts, how to connect with those words and my process for doing that. So I have that at the Art of Living Retreat Center, and then I'll be doing it again. This is exclusive. I haven't been able to post this yet, but I just got confirmation at the Kripalu Yoga Center in Massachusetts in November. And that information will be on my website as well, that writing retreat, which is interesting. It's a huge yoga center in Massachusetts. I'm shaped like a radish. So yoga is not necessarily my number one skill set, but we're going to see how that goes. And then I have a crazy 8-day writing retreat on the water in southern Utah, down the Green River. It's 8 days on a canoe, in which we'll be writing a little bit at night and writing and going on guided canoe trips during the day. And that's 8 days in October in southern Utah, departing from Moab, Utah, and kind of going through Labyrinth Canyon. Completely outside of my wheelhouse. I'm an indoor cat. I enjoy the comforts of hotel living. So being 8 days on the water, I just kind of said yes to it. It's going to be an adventure for all of us who join in on that. And those are the three big events coming up. And I think that's everything. I think you can go to my website and please join my newsletter so you can stay up on all of these John Roedel updates.
I did join your newsletter because I don't want to miss a thing. And I would imagine that maybe since stepping out of your box so far and going on a canoe trip, there might even be another series of poems coming about stepping outside your comfort zone. So I look forward to those.
There might be. There might also be a 60-minute expose on like what happened to John Roedel. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, just send your words. Keep those in a waterproof container, Ziploc bag,
Right.
or something. If you actually put pen to paper, please, because I want to read them. Again, John, thank you so much. This was a special treat for me, and I think for our listeners that maybe are just tired of hearing about so many things out there that they can do to help their grief. And just know that all you have to do is read a few, and I mean literally a few, of John's words, and you will find yourself well on the way to healing, because he has put into words what others have not yet even known they've been thinking. It's really worth it. As with other guests on our episode notes and on our website, we will have all of John's contact information so you can reach out to him. His books are all available on Amazon, most of them available in Kindle as well, if that's your choice. For many people, it is. I don't care how you do it, folks. Just grab one, read one, or, all right, go to Google, go to his website. I guarantee you'll find a poem or a quote somewhere. And I'm really going to help get those quotes out there on Google, John.
Well, I'm going to hire you as my agent at this point. This is really nice.
I've had other guests mention that as well. It's not anything I've ever done, but the more people that mention it, maybe I'm thinking I've got another career in me yet. I've retired 4 times. Maybe I've got a 5th time in me. So to our listeners, remember, please take care of yourselves. Grief sucks. It hurts. It's painful. But we didn't ask for this. Nobody asked us if we'd sign on. It wasn't our choice. It's just the lot we've been dealt in life. So one foot in front of the other, take care of yourselves, and tune in again next week as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.